In this video, I want to talk with you about a counterfeit Christian interpretation of what it means to be a peacemaker. And I want us to examine together what it actually means to be a peacemaker. When I was growing up and I was taken from my father's house and I went to live with my poor mother was dealing with so much chaos from what my father had created that there was just constant fighting, constant bickering, constant violence in our house. And one of the things that my mother would say is, can we just be peacemakers? Unfortunately, my mother did not understand her responsibility in that situation. And what she was saying is, can you all just stop bearing the symptom of what's inside of you, of this spirit of Satan who is wreaking havoc and creating fear as a result of what's unresolved in you? But my mom didn't have that understanding, and most of us don't. In order to examine what a peacemaker actually is, we need to look at what peace actually is and from where peace comes. But I want you to think of that example first. I want you to understand this example of what I just demonstrated to you. My siblings and I came from a home in which we were satanically abused and set against my mother so that our hearts were completely blocked from my mother. We had been manipulated, we had been beat, we had been starved, we had been brainwashed and beat in a room to the point that there was nothing left of us. We had been religiously abused. I shared with you, I think in some videos, and I think also in A Soul Aligned, that my father, while high on amphetamines, would lecture us regarding the Book of Mormon until 4 and 5 in the morning. And if we fell asleep, he would have us waving our arms in the air while walking around a room. So what's going to be inside of our hearts? When you're living in that kind of a satanic environment and you are a child who is spiritually dependent on your parents, you need those parents to get their act together so that you are spiritually protected because you are spiritually dependent on them. And if you don't resolve that suffering, it's going to continue to exist inside of you. That spirit is going to continue to exist inside of you. And the only way to resolve that suffering is in God. Being able to acknowledge what you went through, sort through it, examine the sin that it resulted in, such as being pulled into the vigilant flesh and trying to control, being forced to lie and do certain things against your other parent, being forced to hate and take on the hate of a satanically attacked parent. But my mom had no idea what she was dealing with, and what she was focused on was wrong. I know that she didn't know it was wrong, but it was wrong. She wanted for us to just behave, and she was not examining her own sin of what led her into that situation with my father to begin with, the idolatry of depending on a man like that. And so she was given no wisdom about her own sin and no wisdom about how to help her children. So she demonized us. Just behave. Just be peacemakers. Well, let me ask you something. If we had just behaved, does that then mean that we had peace in our hearts? Can you behave your way into peace in your heart? Because the word I'm reading says that what comes out of your mouth, what comes out of your behaviors, your right hand, your thoughts, your declarations is coming from your heart, not the other way around. What is peace? There are people who put up with friends and family members and bring them into their homes, even though they are living insidious lives of sin that affect other people in the family, that influence people in negative ways, bring you into sin when you're hanging out with them. And they do it in the name of being a peacemaker because they have a counterfeit Christian interpretation of what it means to be a peacemaker. If peace is only by the Spirit of God and fear is only by the spirit of Satan, we're not talking about fear of the Lord, that's a different kind of fear, but a spirit of fear or a spirit of peace. A spirit of peace comes from God, a spirit of fear comes from Satan. And that peace, that spirit of perfect love, drives out fear. What is a peacemaker? Someone who is just repressing and sweeping under the rug and not dealing with their feelings, not dealing with receiving God's ministry in a given situation. It's too intense for them. They don't want to deal with it. And so they justify that they're keeping the peace. That is a lie. And they have no peace Just because their behaviors are not reflecting anything, just because they're not arguing with anyone, they have no peace in their heart. They are not peacemakers. They are engaging in cowardice. They are not speaking the truth. They are not holding others accountable because they're afraid of the consequences that they have to endure in holding others accountable. They don't want to be separated from that person. They don't want others to be mad at them. They don't want to be rejected. They don't want to be held accountable. That is not the making of peace. The making of peace is knowing that you are in the right standing with the Lord and that you're being used by Him. And if being used by Him means that you set boundaries with people who are doing these things, that you speak truth to them and you let them know, and you reprove them and you rebuke them, these are the things that make peace. Because if they're continuing to sin and you're sinning by being around them, being influenced by them, joining yourself to them, how can you have peace? And how can they be brought into peace? How can peace be made? How are you being a peacemaker? Ask yourself the question today, is there any area in your life, are there any things that you are doing where you do not feel peace? Because if you don't feel peace, there's something God is calling you to do in order for that peace to be made. And it might be uncomfortable to you, but the only way that you're going to have peace is to be in the right standing with Him, is to be used by Him in each situation. He might be calling you into a situation where you need to speak the truth because no one else is going to do it. We have a situation in our family where there's a person who creates discord and dissension within the family, threatening, demeaning, gossiping about the family on social media, bullying others with this spirit that's in this person. And no one wants to do anything about it. No one is willing to say anything. And they do not have peace. They are in torment and controlled and coerced by this spirit in this one person. And if they would just do what God is calling them to do, what He has already established in the Word, which is reprove, rebuke, and then dust your feet. People have to experience the consequences of their behaviors. Otherwise, all you're doing is seducing them all the way to hell. You're coddling them in their sinful behavior and not allowing them to experience the logical consequences and to hear the truth from someone who is speaking truth based on the Word of God. If you're unwilling to do that, their blood just might be on your head. You remember that God said this to Ezekiel? You are a watchman. You are a watchman, people of God. If you see that someone is living a life of sin and they are not living in accordance with the Word of God, and they're justifying themselves or think they're justifying themselves by saying that this is what God told them to do, even though it's in opposition to the Word of God, if they're not bearing the fruit, if they're bearing the fruit of sinful behavior and the spirit of the devil in them, and you don't say anything, and you know that that's what's going on. God has given you eyes to see this, and you don't say anything, and you don't back up what you say as a watchman, their blood is going to be on your head. But if you do say something, they will die, and their blood will be on their own head. Either way, if they don't do anything, they're going to die. But the issue of responsibility in that situation as a watchman is always yours. So the entire word has to be reconciled. Being a peacemaker could never mean that we're not also a watchman. Jesus didn't mince words. The apostles didn't mince words. They reproved, they rebuked, they spoke truth. Who has bewitched you? Why are you returning to the vomit? You adulterous people, don't you know that adultery with the world is enmity toward God? Hand them over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that their soul might be saved on the day of the Lord. These are not the things being taught in counterfeit Christianity. Counterfeit Christianity is teaching you to put a muzzle on, and in putting a muzzle on, you don't feel peace because you're not being used for the purpose for which God set you apart. And the reason you're not being used, if this is your situation, is because you have not loved truth. Because truth, His word, is going to testify and teach you who to be and how to be. even though it's uncomfortable. It is not okay for Christians to be excusing themselves from these responsibilities by saying that they are conflict avoidant. That is a satanic psychology of the world way to speak. And if you cower from your responsibility, you will not have peace and you will not fulfill your obligation, your covenant with Christ. How will you ever be used by him if you're too afraid? So I hope that you'll take this into consideration, that you will integrate what this actually means in your particular situation and receive that from God. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.